up, lovely people? It's your girl LC with Black Chicago, and I'm here with filmmaker and creator Shiloh Tumo Washington, who will be presenting next month in the Melanin Roots and Culture series here at the Music Box Theater. Shiloh, tell us a little bit about the project you are presenting next month and just a little bit of the story behind it.
The film I'm presenting next month is called One for My Baby. It is a short film around 19 minutes, and it takes place on the east and south side of Chicago, kind of documenting one romance and how it builds up and how it eventually breaks down.
That's beautiful. So we kind of talked earlier about your influence and how you got started. What would be your advice to someone that, like you, that was up and coming, who didn't really know much about filmmaking? What would your advice be to them?
Well, I always go by what they said in LA during the 70s and 80s, LA Rebellion filmmakers like Charles Burnett and Larry Clark, and they would say kind of the demystification of film and not really thinking too much about craft in terms of you know, what equipment you need or what you don't have, but make use of what you do have. And I've always kind of gone by that as a form of inspiration to try and just shoot things. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it doesn't
I love
all
that.
have to be. I'm a bit of a perfectionist.
Yeah.
It's kind of my toxic trait,
that's
I
all
suppose.
right.
But just kind of loosening up and having the courage to just say what you want to say,
Yes.
even if it doesn't quite come out correct or how you think correct should be. Someone else will take something from it, and that's all you can ask.
I think that's beautiful. Our stories are important, and I'm so glad that the Music Box Theater is doing something like this to showcase someone like you and your talents and to really get our stories out, and especially those of us that are from Chicago. I think that that's really tremendous. So we spoke earlier about poetic realism. What is that, and how does it relate to your work?
For me, poetic realism, my work has been described as that my previous film, Brother, Where Are You?, which was it was a riff on James Baldwin's short story, Sonny's Blues, was kind of it focused on a moment of time and in a way that was really intimate and really a dreamlike almost. And I feel like poetic realism to me is an exploration of feeling and trying to visualize it as best as you can, whether it's a close-up on hands, whether it's a close-up on someone's eyes, there's a tear coming down. You know, it's just something. It's
Denzel tear, that one tear.
Exactly. It's that unspoken thing where when it comes across the screen, you feel it. You don't have to think about it, you just feel it.
That's beautiful.
And that's kind of what I've been working towards, I think, in most of my work.
Yes, and James Baldwin, one of my favorite writers, so amazing and creative. So One for My Baby, of all the stories that you have of growing up here in Chicago, why specifically that story?
I think it was really important for me to tell it just because not only it was my parents and not only because I identified with it so closely, but also because it represents, I think, something that a lot of people should do if they have the time, you know, to kind of look back and see what was going on, how place plays a part in it, because most of it takes place on the east side of Chicago, which I have a very close connection to because that's where my father moved actually when we all kind of split up a little bit, and I spent a lot of time over there, and I was able to kind of see the sights, you know, like the South Shore Cultural Center is one place, the 63rd Street Beach was right before, and you come down. It's really, it's something to go back to those places with a creative intent in mind. I've always kind of gone there, and like a lot of my earlier films were literally just me shooting nature and shooting trees and trying to figure out what about all these places stands out to me as a filmmaker and as a creative. So I think making this one particular film a romance, my first romance piece, it was really important for me to kind of break down genre into my own little thing.
Yes, and I think that that's beautiful. I feel like, you know, W.E.B. Du Bois said, all art is propaganda. And I feel like there needs to be a balance of the stories that we tell. So I'm so glad that you're taking a more romantic take of Chicago and showing the beauty of it, because, you know, we can see so many negative things that are out there, right? So it's beautiful that you're coming from a different perspective with a different aesthetic to show the beauty of the South Side and the softness of it and the things that a lot of us native Chicagoans only really know about. You know what I mean? So I'm really excited to see it and how you portray that. How did you get your start? Because a lot of people, you know, get exposed to filmmaking a little later on in life. Some of them are exposed a little earlier. What brought you into filmmaking? What inspired you? How did you get started?
In high school, I had a television production class, which is kind of rare. I don't think a lot of high schools really have access to like a full-blown studio. They had I think 2 studios, television
Wow.
inside of the school, like in kind of the nooks and crannies, and they had a remodel right before I came in, which
Okay.
included this beautiful, beautiful space where we can all go and edit, and we can. I took classes. I took it to the highest possible class I could in my 4 years. So I think that had a really, really big part in me getting involved in the production aspect of things, because I always watch movies. I feel like everyone has that one movie, 1 or 2 movies they've seen over and over and over again. I know for me it was definitely Forrest Gump, something like that.
Okay, great movie.
Yeah, on VHS. That was one of the VHSs we had, and I would just watch it over and over. Not that I knew that I was going to be going towards that route of creating something, creating a film, but I think
the
kind of
seed was planted. It's like kind of building up
from an early
in you.
age.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And look at the alignment that they remodeled right before you got there. So now they have this program, and you're just like, okay, this is where I want to be. I'm going to create and direct. One of the things I thought was intriguing as we were speaking earlier is that you learned that being a director means you have to plan. So what has that process been like? Or what would your advice be to someone who does want to direct, who kind of doesn't know what they're getting into?
I would say the biggest thing that drew me towards directing was really forcing myself. I think we talked earlier of getting out of this shell that I was in, kind of a quieter. No, I was actually talking not to you, but getting out of the more quiet aspects of my being and forcing myself, because you can't be a director and be too reticent. You can't be too within yourself. You have to kind of be able to express your ideas and get everyone, not just the actors, but everyone that's there. They're all there to kind of produce a vision that's catered, or that's curated by you.
Yeah.
So it's very important to think really hard and plan, and I would say get organized. That's that's the main thing, because as soon as you get organized, a lot becomes possible, just in terms of what you can do.
Yes.
What you're prepared to do.
There we go.
Get
so
organized.
You heard it here. You're trying to direct. Get it together. Got to be organized. Have it together. Get you a Virgo in your circle. They're real organized. So there are different approaches that you can take, as an artist when creating a project. Who is this story for? Why? What am I trying to say, etc. What is it that you want audience to take away when they see a Shiloh Tumo Washington piece, especially the one you're presenting next month?
I think the most important thing for me has always been being able to tell when a film or work, whatever it is created with love and care, and that they cared about what they made. It wasn't just a product, it was something that spoke to a very real feeling, reality, something in the creator's life that was really necessary for them to get out. And I think this film is really, it was for my mother. It was for, it was for my mother and the single mothers who have kind of had to hold down a child and hold down a relationship before that, which I know I witnessed it, and I always just, you always take your mother's side. I think, at least that's my theory.
I do too.
In my case, I think growing up, I always took my mother's side, and I wanted to go into her perspective a little bit, because that's something I never really thought of doing.
Yeah.
I never really thought of, how it feels to be in that position, and how it feels to have a child and have a promise before that child by this person you're having the child with of, something that's going to be great, something that's going to be nurturing, a relationship that's going to last for a long time. And when it doesn't pan out that way, it's really something to think about, because I think just getting older and getting more and more romantically involved myself, I'm starting to see how important films like that are, romance films are. Because, you kind of grow up, you think about it like, oh, this is a romance film. It's not like, a great movie, But then they're the best ones. Yeah. I think I've come to understand that a little bit more.
Yeah. That's interesting that you say that. Some people will just kind of disregard it. Oh, it's a romance movie, but is it a great movie? Like what are they trying to say? What do you feel, and what journey are they taking you on? And you're right. Sometimes that's the most beautiful connection that you have is through a movie about love. So I think that's really awesome. Yeah. So as a filmmaker, what has been the most rewarding part of the process, and what has been the most challenging?
I think the most rewarding part of the process is seeing it on the screen and seeing people engage with it and to ask you questions about it. I think this is the most exhilarating feeling. Yeah. And I think the most challenging part for me is kind of locking down and knowing when a work is complete and knowing when to stop working on it and when to stop touching it. Because I'm someone who, after a screening, I truly believe that you should be able to go back and be like, okay, what didn't work here?
Yes.
Because there's a thing called picture lock that they like to do a lot, where it's the film is done. Like, you can't touch it anymore. It goes off to the colors. But I've been so DIY for most of my filmmaking history that I've been the editor, the producer, the director, the writer. So I've had that freedom to kind of be able to look back and edit as much as I want.
Until it's right.
Exactly. And just, it's subjective, so you never know what kind of crowd is going to respond to it in what kind of way. What version of the film is going to work better here, and what version is going to work better over there.
It's so true.
Yeah,
because that can make or break a film. I don't know, sometimes you'll see on like TBS or TNT, they'll show the uncut version of a movie, or the director's cut, and it's like, had they released this, it would have been a completely different movie. Those edits and those changes and everything are very important. So I appreciate you putting in that time to make sure it's right for you, because the audience is going to resonate with this. So I think that's awesome. One of the things I really enjoy about Shannon Sharpe, when he does his interviews, is that he asks his guests to name the Mount Rushmore of whatever field that they're in. So with you being a director, who would be your Mount Rushmore? Who are your top 4 directors that you just love? Who are your people?
My top 4 directors.
Who you got?
I wasn't expecting to be creative.
Yeah.
But I think for me, oh man, that's a really difficult question. I think my favorite directors are always the ones, it's not necessarily the ones who have the most films, right? It's not the ones who have like 30 or 40 or 50, feature films out. It's always the ones who did it in like 4 or 5. And there was a filmmaker called Larissa Shepetko from the former Soviet Union. She did amazing films. My friend actually told me to watch this one called Wings.
Okay.
And it was by far one of the greatest films I ever saw. And you don't hear too much about her because she passed away pretty young. I think she had one or two more films after that, and then she tragically passed away in a car crash. So she's one that I really look forward to looking at over and over again.
Wow.
Ingmar Bergman from Sweden, he's a guy that, I don't know, his contribution to my idea of filmmaking, it's more of a theatrical, kind of experimental, avant-garde approach, especially some of his earlier films. Man,
that's good. Did any of his work stand out to you, like a recommendation you have for people to kind of check out from him?
For Ingmar Bergman, I feel like one that really resonated with me immediately was this film called Winterlight. I watched that one. That's what inspired Brother, Where Are You?, my previous film that I told you about. It's crafted with such care and precision, and it's hard to kind of see something like that and be like, oh man, what am I doing?
Yeah.
How do you get,
like you can do that?
Because it's a very precise form that he has, and he also has scenes from a marriage, which is also a very, very intense, episodic, 6-hour long situation where it goes into people and just, I guess, the inability to communicate after a certain point in a relationship, and he gets pretty deep.
I was gonna say, I like that.
He has a more grim outlook, I would say.
But we need that too, that balance. Yeah.
I really like Barry Jenkins, I mentioned, of course.
Yes.
He's someone that I watch Moonlight, If Beale Street Could Talk, those two. I mean, there's not much I can say that probably hasn't been said about him, because he's a contemporary. He's someone who's working currently.
Yeah.
And 4, I might have to stop. I don't know.
Okay. All right, we're going to come back later. Wait, you're number 4. There we go. We closed it out. So speaking of which, what is next for you? What is next for Shiloh Tumo Washington? Like, what do you have planned?
I'm currently working on my first feature film, which is something that's not as short. It's longer than that, and something that I can really kind of continuing the thread of One for My Baby, where I'm going back in time now to my grandparents and kind of observing because their story is even more, it has many more layers to it than I think I understand until I started asking my grandmother and how she got with my grandfather, who was from Nigeria. He came here kind of to study on a whim the American dream and so on and so forth. And they ended up together, ended up moving to Nigeria, having 4 children together. It's a pretty interesting story that I've always wanted to delve into. And I think just in general, a lot of the work I want to do does travel back in time and travel to these eras where we don't really go too often, I don't think, in films. Like, we don't go back to Chicago in like the 50s or 60s, and we don't see how they lived, because it's not that different. I mean, it's clearly very different technologically, but at the same time, the people are there, their stories are there, and what they went through is just as important. Like, if you look at a Raisin in the Sun or something like that from back in that era. I feel like it was a really interesting time to kind of go back and tap into the music, the scene in general, the art scene, everything that was happening, and kind of observe domestic lives. And I feel like that's kind of what I've always been working towards.
That's beautiful. We got to preserve our history. We got to tell those stories, or else they'll die, you know? So I think that that's very important. You know, that's something I think about often is I'm glad that I had the conversations that I did with my grandparents, and there's still questions that I have that I would love to ask them, but I'm glad that I did ask them a lot just to get their perspective, because if we leave it to the masses or just, you know, your stereotypical experience, we don't really get to see a variety of things, you know, when we're multifaceted people. So not everybody struggled, not everybody had it great either. So it's good to see that variety in our stories.
Yeah, exactly.
And where we come from. What I love about something you said earlier is, when I asked you what was one of the most challenging things, you didn't mention anything about finances. And I think that a lot of people get discouraged, including myself, when working in the arts about how am I going to find funding? Am I going to have the money for the equipment or different things like that? How have you been able to combat some of those things? Is your dream just big enough where you're like, I don't care what it takes, I'm going to make it happen? Like, what has that experience been like for you?
Well, I think for me, the main thing that's an advantage of working today is that the tools are there. You don't need a film camera, which is something I'm very interested in, the technological aspect of things, because things like that, the more expensive equipment back in the day, you had to have a film camera where the film was running through the camera.
Oh yeah.
You had to have a magazine, you have someone load it, you had to have a darkroom, a developer, you had to get it scanned. Nowadays, you can really pull out a phone and
make it happen.
I mean, not that that's, you know, not that it's that easy to say, but it kind of is in a lot of ways, because you don't have that barrier of equipment and technology and technological barriers keeping you from being able to produce an image, which is the most important thing. You're producing images, 24 of them a second. It's not. It's not as complex as it used to be. And I think in terms of finances, I mean, I always joke and say that my projects, the budget was my checkings and my savings account. Because I'm always self-funding and trying to get funding where I can outside, but at the same time, up to now, it's always just been kind of doing for self and figuring out how to make things happen on a budget. Because I like to pay people, I like to pay the actors especially, and make sure they're compensated, at least I can give them something. Because we're all kind of coming at it from the same direction. I mean, we're all younger, at least everyone I've worked with so far, with the exception of one guy, Harold Dennis. He's a great actor. But just trying to show everyone respect and show as much possible grace as I can. No,
I think that that's absolutely amazing. And you're right, you heard it first. Get the camera, don't let it hold you back. Get that phone, make it happen. Do not let that hold you back. Well, Shiloh, this has been great. I'm Lauren from Black Chicago. This is Shiloh Tumo Washington. Please check him out at the Music Box Theater for the Melanin Roots and Culture series. He is a phenomenal director. I can't wait to see more things from him. This is LC from Black Chicago. Peace.